So I'd like to introduce our guest for tonight, Professor Andrew Laslett, to give us a special presentation this evening. He's the Head of R&D, Research and Development at Magic Valley, Melbourne's cell-cultured meat company, where he deploys his biomedical expertise in stem cell research to make meat sustainably and without harming animals, giving us the foods we know and love without slaughter and using less of the Earth's resources. So thank you very much for joining us, Andrew.
Thanks, Andrea. Thanks very much for the invitation. And I'm going to start with no apologies at all for showing you photos of delicious food at what might be some of your dinner time. So hopefully people have already had something to eat. So basically what I'll do today is go through a quick overview of how we make cultivated meat at Magic Valley, and a little bit about what's going on around the world, and start with some of the reasons why we think cultivated meat is a good option for the future. Start with a video where the sound may not work for you guys, but let's see what happens. So that was the basics of how we make cultivated meat, and but even though the voice sounds professional and like a cartoon voice, you can believe the script because I wrote the script for that. So I agree with everything that was said. So why are we looking at making meat in a different way? Obviously, it's better for animals if they don't have to be killed for people to be able to eat meat. But it's also definitely better for the environment. The figures on this slide show what would happen if there was a complete replacement of traditional meat production with cultivated or cultured meat. Little side note, I don't think there's ever going to be a complete replacement, but I think these figures are still useful. So if we were to replace all traditional meat production with cultivated meat, there'd be a 92% reduction in greenhouse gas emissions, a 95% reduction in land use, and a 78% reduction in water use, which is quite astounding in terms of what's happening at the moment. If we can even chip into that a little bit with a percentage of the market for the growing meat market around the world. It's also supply chains are much more stable making it cultivated meat. They're not anywhere near as affected by things like bushfires or flood or animal diseases coming through and wiping out flocks. And it also less risk of diseases coming from humans to animals. So in terms of land use, these are some figures from Our World in Data. And we know, and I think I'm probably preaching to the converted with this group around these figures. So I'll just quickly go through that. 29% of the planet's surface is made up of land, and only 71% of that is habitable. Of that 71%, 50% of that is used for agriculture. And of that agricultural land, only 77% of that agricultural land is used for livestock, but that only supplies 18% of the global calorie supply. So that's a massive overuse of land for livestock. So if there's another way to do that, and that only supplies 37% of the global protein supply. So there's a huge amount of land being potentially wasted. And the story around, no, it's not a story, the facts around greenhouse gas emissions, I'm not going to dwell on, but livestock animals are some of the highest greenhouse gas emitters that we have. When we talk to public groups at Magic Valley, often vegans or vegetarians will say, why don't you just tell people to stop eating meat? And yeah, that is one way to reduce meat consumption and create more land. But the reality is, over the last 70 years, there's been a steady increase worldwide of the amount of meat eaten around the world in all areas of the world. And the dip you see here around 2020 was not due to people not wanting to eat meat, but more so due to supply chains breaking down at the beginning of the COVID pandemic. So what all of that put together means is that with the growing population on the planet, predicted to be approximately 10 billion by 2050, the people already here and the new people coming demanding more animal-based products. And with the newer generations looking for more ethical ways, maybe because they want a planet to live on that isn't just fields for raising livestock to make meat. They're looking for a type of solution. And what we think at Magic Valley is that cultivated meat can be a definite part of that solution in terms of providing a reliable, sustainable source of animal protein without any animal cruelty or slaughter. What we do is, after we've taken the cells, turned them into stem cells and grown them in small containers, we need to be able to grow them in suspension, which means mixed in a liquid, and be able to feed them much the same way an animal receives food by eating. We provide food to the cells through the liquid that we grow them in a large vessel called a bioreactor. Here, there's a picture of me, and you obviously don't know me, but I'm 6'4", so they're quite big bioreactors behind me. And this is at a supplier we are now using in India last year. So what's the holdup? Why can't we already buy cultivated meat in a local supermarket? Why haven't all of the fast food chains replaced their supply chains with cultivated meat? So they, because my strong feeling is that there is no way that anyone would be able to tell the difference between a McDonald's burger made from cultivated meat and a McDonald's burger, or any other burger for that matter, made using traditional meat. So these 6 points here are really the key things that need to be overcome in order to make cultivated meat more of a reality and more than just I think it's 3 restaurants in Melbourne and a few more in Sydney and some restaurants in Singapore. So if we think about Australia, and that's just with the cultivated quail products produced by VOW, that's all that's available in the entire country at the moment. And they've done incredibly well to get through these 6 points. So regulatory approval is not a simple thing to get. So obviously governments are responsible for the health and safety of their populations, and food is critically important to be safe and reliable. And with quite novel forms of making food, there needs to be a really good system in place to make sure that any new or novel food product is safe. So in Australia, at least, the regulatory process can cost hundreds of thousands of dollars and takes, I think it took VOW well over 2 years from initial submission to get approval. Obviously, scale up is the ability to supply enough material for the demand that's out there. And if we were to replace even 1% of the traditional meat market at the moment, it's going to take a lot of initial capital costs in the form of multiple bioreactors in order to be able to scale up. And to do that, it's got to be economical for the company to produce it, because producing something at a loss and selling it means the company's not going to last very long. So the cost of goods going into the manufacture of the meat products has to be low enough in order to be able to produce a product that people can afford to buy. So that's a real challenge. And obviously, once you have a product, you want people to want to buy it. So you need to assess whether there's consumer acceptance. And you very much need to make sure that that people understand that even though it's not coming directly from an abattoir floor like traditional meat production, cultivated meat or cultured meat can still cause disease if treated badly. And it's mainly human contact with the meat that is the problem there. And I'm happy to talk about that. As I said, in Australia, there's a really strong regulatory pathway through Food Standards Australia, New Zealand, through their novel food product pathway, which now has components looking and dealing directly with cultivated or cultured meat. You need to use food grade components. It is possible to make genetically modified cultivated or cultured meat products, but at the moment, the majority of the companies around the world and us and VOW in Australia are not using the genetically modified route. And if you were to use a genetically modified organism as part of your food product, you would need approval from the Office of the Gene Technology Regulator. Worldwide, there's 3 cultured meat products approved by the Singapore Food Agency, 2 cultivated chicken products, and now a cultivated fat product in the United States. VOW has approval in both Singapore and Australia and New Zealand. So for SANS obviously looks over Australia and New Zealand. An Israeli company called Aleph Farms has approval for cultivated beef. And in the UK, there's approval for a cultivated chicken as pet food. And finally, a cultivated salmon product has been approved in the US, or at least in some states in the US. There's a lot of political divide over the uptake of cultivated meat products in the United States and in parts of Europe. So what's coming next that we know about? There's a really interesting company called Gourmet, which has just merged with another company, and I forget their new name, but they've applied for regulatory approval in multiple jurisdictions around the world, and now also including in Australia for their foie gras product, which will be really interesting, and I think will most likely be the next cultivated meat product approved in Australia, which will be interesting to see how that goes head to head against the VOW product made from quail. This one, their products made from duck. So this is the current state of the art with scale. This is a picture of VOW's 20,000 litre reactor, and they're 200, 2,000 and 20,000. So that you need to step up in volume in order to be able to continually grow the meat or the cultivated meat products. And that's the largest reactor system functioning and working anywhere in the world to our knowledge at VOW at their facility in Sydney. Are cell-based meat products safe? So the Food and Agriculture Organisation part of the World Health Organisation have published a really lengthy document examining the safety and potential risks of cell-based food or cell-based meat products. And if you're interested, I can send around the link to that. It's quite an interesting read, but all cultivated meat products are subject to at least the same microbiological safety tests that traditionally produced meat is, and I would argue that it's actually safer than traditionally based meat. If you get a tray of mince from your local supermarket, that can come from up to 30 different animals when it all gets mixed together. Whereas coming from a sterile bioreactor, there's much less chance of infection being present. That said, with both products, you need to make sure you cook them at the appropriate temperature to ensure safety. There's a lot of noise that gets made about cultivated meat or cell-based meats giving you cancer. I'm happy to go into in depth why it's no less risk of eating cultivated meat in terms of cancer, the incidences of cancer than what there would be from eating a lot of traditionally made meat. And also traditional meat, interestingly, 60 to 80% of all antibiotics produced worldwide are used on livestock, and that has led to an increase in the human population of antimicrobial resistance. And as a one-off sentence, that doesn't sound like a big problem, but antimicrobial resistance actually kills thousands to millions of people around the world over time, because there's only a very limited number of antibiotics that are in existence. So if you develop resistance to those antibiotics because you've been exposed to them through the meat that you're eating over many decades, that can greatly increase your risk of getting an infection that can't be helped with antibiotics. So cultivated meat is in the main produced without the use of any antibiotics, and definitely not at the levels that are used in traditional livestock production. So I would argue that in the long run, cultivated meat products are going to be much safer than traditional meat products. So what's happening at Magic Valley? We've been around now since 2020. We had a laboratory since 2022, and we launched our first lamb mince products in 2022, and followed up with our pork products in 2023. So on the left, you can see our lamb mince tacos, and on the right are chili pork dumplings. So what we make at Magic Valley is what we call an unstructured product, or a minced product, or depending on which country you're in, a ground meat product. This is a real meat experience. We've had literally hundreds of people, including chefs, food critics, taste our products, and the primary reaction that we get from people is, wow, there's no way I would have been able to tell that this was any different to a traditional meat production. We think in the long run, cultivated meat products will be better for human health in terms of they're much more tunable in terms of the way you can increase the fat content, decrease the fat content, add vitamin B12, omega-3s, etc. So if a foodie wants a really tasty, quite fatty grade of meat, that's possible. And if a gym junkie wants a much leaner type of meat, that's also possible too. In the long run, at scale, our projections are that we will be able to produce cultivated meat more cheaply than traditional animal agriculture, which is what I believe in the long run will make the very large companies move to using this type of technology, because they'll be able to make more money. We think it's a more environmentally sustainable practice, and obviously if you care at all about animal and the lives of animals, it's ethically preferable. So we're aiming to submit for regulatory approval. End of 2026 is probably a bit tight now. We need to raise a lot of money, and we need to get a lot done. And I'll talk a little bit more about a slight sidetrack we've taken recently after this slide. Our MVP product will be a hybrid unstructured mince product, and initially available at select restaurants and then through food service outlets. And a number of food service companies are already wanting to be customers of ours, but we need to get to a bigger scale, getting larger bioreactors. We have a new 10-litre bioreactor coming from India in the next few weeks. Currently, there's only 4 of us in the company, but this will obviously increase. And basically, long-term, what we want to be able to do is to provide a choice for consumers that still want to eat meat, but they want to do it without harming animals or the planet. So the sidestep I was talking about is, in order to bring some revenue into the company, what we've done is use the technology that we have developed for Magic Valley to create a cultivated pet training bite or treat containing cultivated pork, and we are currently selling this online. We did a very soft launch a few weeks ago and completely sold out within 6 days. So we're now taking people onto the waiting list. So this Rogue Pet is our pet food brand within Magic Valley. And so our dog training treats contain cultivated pork, apple, oat flour, sweet potato, brewer's yeast, and chicory root. And if you want more information on them, there's a Rogue Pet website, roguepet.com.au, and there's a Rogue Pet Instagram page, and we have some very cute dog pics on those pages. Really happy to take any questions.
All right, thank you very much, Andrew. I've got questions, but I will start with the questions that I've received at the RSVPs, and also a comment in here in the chat about not being able to tell or taste the difference is massive, the difference between cultured meat and slaughtered meat. Comment goes on to say, I've seen some overseas videos where journalists have been invited to try cultivated meat, but say they can tell the difference. And I wonder if this is more about the difference between taste and texture. So the texture of, I suppose tell us about the texture that you get.
Yeah, no, that's a really good point. And I haven't talked about structured products. Texture's actually a lot more difficult. With a minced product, generally people don't eat unflavored minced meat products. So when we make our minced product, we use the same spices and that you would use. So a chili pork dumpling is made with pork mince, and it tastes like a chili pork dumpling. It's much harder to do that than with a steak or a chop. And the technology is there to do it, but to do it economically is going to be really difficult. So I think for the next little while, until there's further technology breakthroughs, the available products will be mostly minced products.
And I mean, that's not a drawback, is it? Because we eat minced, so if we can start by replacing those products. I'm really looking forward to pork mince in particular. That's one of the first meats I stopped eating, knowing that pigs are lowered into a CO2 atmosphere to stun them. It's a question that's to do with regulation. How do you plan to tackle the inevitable challenge from carnivores and, I suppose, more impactfully, lawmakers that say you can't call it meat? Are you worried about labelling restrictions?
I think we've already, to an extent, that battle has been fought already. So with VOW, so the labelling guidelines now in Australia are that you can use meat, but it has to have the descriptor before it of cultivated or cultured and the species that it comes from. The species is super important because if you're allergic to lamb made in the traditional way, you're going to be allergic to cultivated lamb.
It's interesting you should mention the species because there's legislation in, for example, the EU. They're working through banning the use of the words not just meat, but shapes of meat like steak and sausage and burger for plant-based or cell-cultured products. That's very strange. That I find it strange that a sausage could be made out of any type of meat or not a type of meat. That's banning that for non-meat is bizarre.
The percentage of traditional meat in a traditional sausage is not very high.
Yeah, so I suppose the second half of that question was around things like the Italian government banning meat, but I guess we have to fight the battles, or as you say, it's already been won on our shores, and just be an example to the world, I guess.
I think that's true, and I know that some of the companies in the US are viewing the legal battles that are going on in some states where there's nothing available yet, but it's been banned, as in a sense free advertising, because the banned states seem to align with red states, and the non-banned states are blue states in the US. So it's good and bad because it draws attention, and then people who may never even have heard of cultured or cultivated meat are beginning to hear about it because of the fact that someone's banned it in the news on, what is it? Let's find out what it is.
So the animals that had their cells taken from the procedure, what happened to them? Will animals still be used in some way to produce cell-cultured meat?
Yeah, so the amount of cells that we take from an animal is smaller than the tip of my little finger. And we never need to go back to that animal. The animals we used are still happily living on the property where we sourced the sample from. In one case, it was from an ear punch, which was being done. So we can just take the scrap cells that are caught on the edge of the ear punch, and in the other case, that animal was a small scraping from the ear of skin done under anaesthesia. We never need to go back to the same animal for more product. But if we were to do a new species, or if people talk to us a fair bit around the genetics of, let's say, a prime New Zealand lamb or specific breeds of cow, and that may be a reason for a different product line that might come from a different animal's genetics in terms of a perceived taste preference.
Mm. Do you have different levels of success in growing different species?
So, as I've said, we're a pretty small company. We started with lamb because Paul, our founder, that was what he wanted to do as an Australian food, and nobody else had done lamb at that point.
I did want to ask about the lamb because we've got the Australian lamb ads, and it's a big cultural touchstone.
And that's pretty much exactly why Paul chose lamb. We then tried pork and beef at the same time. The pork worked really well straight away, and we just ran out of hands so the beef we didn't follow up, but we definitely have plans to do that down the track, as well as other species that we think pretty much every livestock species is amenable to the technology that we use, and even seafood.
Sticking with the technical questions, another question is about, are the cell lines all immortalized, and do you use fetal bovine serum? I suppose part of the immortalized question is like how much cell cultured meat product can you get out of the single sample, and there's the FBS part as well.
Yeah, so the second part I'll take first. We never have used fetal bovine serum, fetal calf serum, or any animal serum, or in fact any other animal products apart from the starter cells in our production and research at Magic Valley. And we think that's one of our advantages, because animal cells really like fetal bovine serum, and it's very hard to wean them away from it once they know it, and the future generations of those cells. So no, we don't use any serum products. Yep, our cells are technically not immortalized. As a scientist, I don't like the word immortal because it's impossible to prove. But what it means in scientific terms is it's been genetically changed to have a growth advantage compared to the cells it came from. So the VOW cells, for example, have been genetically changed by a spontaneous immortalization event, which basically means putting cells into a dish and waiting in very small numbers and waiting till they mutate, and some of those cells will develop a growth advantage which will allow you to make unlimited quantities of meat. What we do is slightly different. We use an approach called reprogramming, which is something I've been involved with for the past 20 years or so. So it's basically having an understanding of the very early steps that stem cells take in the mammalian body, allows us to turn any type of cell back into a stem cell that can turn into anything. And we do that not by altering the genetic structure or the DNA sequence, but we just change some of the marks on the DNA, what's called epigenetics. So what we're doing is not creating a GMO. It's in a sense wiping the memory of the cells and then turning them back into a stem cell that can then turn into muscle, fat, and many other cell types. And we know how to grow those cells in an unlimited fashion. So what that means is that they will just continually keep making copies of themselves very quickly, and allow us to produce lots of cell mass as product. I hope that answered that question.
Yeah, I think so. Just so for everyone, I'm a microbiologist by training myself. So my understanding is that cells will eventually stop replicating unless something has changed in either their genetic code, or as you mentioned, the epigenetics of how the genes are expressed so that they will keep replicating.
So I was just wondering how you prime the cells for that, because when I do that in cell culture, I have to put it in like an overexpression of SV40. So a really common factor that's from a simian virus, like a chimp virus, that stops the cell's DNA damage repair mechanism from going off, so that way it can accumulate mutations and become immortal. I was wondering if you could go into how you avoid using that genetic modification and prime the cells.
So priming is not a term we use. So what we do is add factors to the cells, either as a messenger RNA, so that they will send signals and create proteins inside the cytoplasm of the cell to act on the cell to make it, to turn it back into an undifferentiated or early stem cell with the same characteristics as an embryonic stem cell, so an induced pluripotent stem cell. And we do that. So the original way of doing that was using viruses, lentiviruses, to implant those factors into the genetic sequence, into the DNA. But the way we do it doesn't change the DNA sequence at all. So it's easier to do with cells that are growing quickly, but it's possible to do with nearly any type of cell type that is still dividing.
It makes me wonder if there's an argument for ongoing testing of the cell line, whether that's part of, I don't know if that's part of the conditions of VOW's approval that they had with Fazan's, or whether you think that would be a good idea to see if there's genetic drift over time.
So what you have to do as a cultivated meat company is create a cell bank. So cells will have genetic drift over time in culture. So what you want to do is have an understanding of how many times they can make copies of themselves and still be stable. So you basically create freezers full and liquid nitrogen tanks full of little vials of cells that are all identical to each other, so that instead of going back to the animal to start, you go back to this bank to start with a small tube of cells, which will then make quite a number of copies of itself within the safe range that your production capacity will allow to. So yeah, basically it's it's not exactly the same cells that are going forever and ever and ever, and monitoring is absolutely part of the way that the cultivated products are going to be produced. What I would say is that even if there was a mutation, it wouldn't be unsafe for people to eat, but it might change the way the cell grew, so the whole production process might be out. So it's more of a reason to keep the process identical each time to be monitoring for those genetic changes, rather than a safety reason, if that makes sense.
All right, I think we should shift gears and address some of these questions about, for example, the regulatory environment, including what could the government do to support the cultivated meat industry to scale up? And I suppose that's kind of the same question as what could an advocacy group that is in favour of seeing these technologies flourish, what could we advocate for to, I suppose, remove barriers and increase the opportunities for cultivated meat?
The government's actually been pretty good. I know that's not what you normally hear. In terms of the regulatory agency, the agency themselves are stuck with the charges they have to, because the Treasury wants them to be to have a cost recovery mechanism. So they charge per hour that they think they're gonna spend on reviewing an application. So other countries around the world don't charge, and in some ways that's stifling innovation. So making some noise around that topic in terms of the cost of having novel foods assessed would be helpful. The government's been quite helpful through its industry growth program. We've got some funding through that. The R&D tax credit program helps us. So we get a tax credit on money internally we spend on research and development, which is pretty much everything we do at the moment. So look, I think telling the government they've done a good job, and it's an interesting time because the CSIRO has just announced that they're stopping a lot of what they have been doing in terms of the broader cellular agriculture area, in terms of precision fermentation research, and helping some of the companies, and in fact spinning out a number of the companies around Australia. And their CSIRO is having to tighten their belts and is cutting a number of staff in those areas. So I think there's multiple ways in which technology and biotechnology can improve in a sustainable way the foods that we eat and the effects that has on the planet. So that's a pretty broad and not specific way but basically showing support for biotechnological approaches, including cultivated meat, would be helpful.
Yeah, I mean, that's a good point, to give credit where credit's due. And I've watched with horror as another 100 jobs have been cut from the CSIRO. Given that the fact that the production is non-GM, would that allow you to claim organic status?
That depends on every ingredient that we put in. Yeah, I don't know is my answer. I think we could definitely use organic ingredients as in the hybrid product, which will be our first product, will have plant-based material in there that could definitely be sourced organically. I don't know how we get organic certification for cultivated meat. That's an interesting one.
Yeah, it sounds like there'd be a new framework for that, and well, hopefully we've got the proliferation of cell-cultured meat that becomes a relevant question. Second part of the question is, does your business plan require gaining recognition for the environmental benefits, or are you seeking to eventually compete on costs? So I guess that's
it's really interesting. And we've been part of a number of accelerators, including Google Startups for Sustainable Development. And the continual advice we get is that to be a successful product, we've got to first compete. It's price and taste are the top two things. And if we don't get those right, then it won't matter what the next thing is. I think in this audience, obviously, let me put it this way. At Magic Valley, we strongly believe in the reasons why we're doing this. But to be the most successful, we've got to have great taste and good price. Otherwise, no one's going to buy it, but it's going to reach a far smaller number of people. So if we can achieve those first two, then without even having to talk about it, we're going to make a bigger effect on the environment, on the lives of animals, and on the planet. So do we need people to realize that that's what they're doing? I mean, somebody said to me over the weekend that Donald Trump could potentially get Greenpeace's Man of the Year for increasing interest in electric cars more than anyone on the planet. Not that is what he's trying to do, but it's the same story with Henry Ford doing more for the lives of horses than anyone else.
Yeah, I want to dive into these ethics a bit first. Although, firstly, a question that just popped into my mind when you mentioned the reason that Magic Valley is doing this. Does that tie into something that we mentioned before the talk started about VOW not being a competitor? Because I see a different messaging coming from VOW versus Magic Valley.
Yeah, so VOW, look, the reality is as a very new, developing, very small industry, we need any company working in the area to do well. If the meat industry is so huge, the traditional meat industry, that if VOW does well, that might make investors say, "Oh, look, they've done well, but it's expensive to buy into a part of them. But these other companies that are out there are at an earlier stage, so maybe they're worth a shot as well because that company's doing well." is part of it. And yeah, there's plenty of room for multiple cultivated meat companies, even in a small population country like Australia. And part of the reason why, in some ways, because Australia can produce its own food to a large degree, why it makes sense to make a cultivated meat company in Australia is partly that reputation for good, safe food production being in Australia.
I've seen a survey from Food Frontier a couple of years ago that surveyed Asian countries, 5 Asian countries, I think it was, and they were very open to trying cell-cultured meat from Australia in particular because we're so trusted for food. Something you mentioned there about before, we'd mentioned that the government, the regulatory environment was quite good, but we've got the looming wrath of the traditional meat industry. So I guess I'd be hoping that the government will not be giving undue power or letting them have undue influence over a nascent industry like cell-cultured meat. So I think that's something for advocacy groups and industry groups to be very aware of. I appreciated in the talk also the mention of less risk in the supply chains. So when it comes to the ethics, it's not just the slaughter that we have to worry about, but even the farmers who do their best to treat their animals well up until the moment they send them to be slaughtered. In the last couple of years, we've had floods where hundreds of thousands of farmed animals have died in Queensland and then again in New South Wales. So there's always inherent risk in the animal farming industry for animals and
we saw bird flu
humans as well.
with the culling of chickens.
Yeah, well, we've just about 6 years ago we had an animal-borne disease that almost stopped the turning of the earth. And
algal blooms knocking out large parts of the fish populations in South Australia, fish and other marine animals.
But yeah, it goes back decades and decades. The part of the reason the 1890 recession was so bad is half the sheep flock died in a drought. This isn't new. Yeah.
Thank you for that historical insight. I also appreciated the pragmatism and that telling people to just stop eating meat hasn't worked so far, right? Because people always knew that was an option, and 5% of people did, and 95% of people continued to eat meat. But I do want to delve into this comment that you don't think there'll ever be a complete end to eating animals. I think it's important that we have the technology that lets people not eat animals but still enjoy the traditional foods that they're used to. And I guess at WePlanet, we're hoping that'll bring about what we call a techno-ethical shift, where we've got the technology to allow the ethical shift so that people's actions can catch up to what they would like to do because the technology enables it. So I don't know. My hope is that once the technology is in place, there will be just a switch at some point where we think, we're not going to eat animals anymore. Oh, why did we ever do that? And now we don't have to. That's my hope.
I hope so too.
I will just ask another couple of questions in the last minutes if we can. There was a question about how do you get the costs down? I suppose there's been a lot of improvement within the industry over the last decades.
Yeah, so
is there any company secrets?
Well, it's not really company secrets. The non-serum based cell medias have been around for quite a while because they were developed for clinical use, so for treating humans. But they were something around $1,000 a litre. So because that's what people for medical products are prepared to pay, and because you need absolutely incredibly stringent regulations for something that's going to be potentially injected inside somebody. But for food, that's going to be cooked, it doesn't need to be that stringent and safe. It's not that it's unsafe, it's just you don't need to go to the nth degree to make sure it's safe in every application. But what has happened is larger companies that are producers of small components in animal feed, etc., have realised that the components they're using for animal feed at a very low cost are identical to what will go into media to feed people, and they can make a human food grade level product. So, and they already have the machinery there to produce thousands of tons of these ingredients that are needed. So they've stepped into the market and priced out the pharmaceutical companies who were looking to broaden their market from clinical to food, but were coming in at a much higher cost. And that's where a lot of the stories around the cost. So this $1,000 a litre media we now have in our hands with what we've got today at the scale we're buying at, where we only have 4 people and are coming to a 10-litre reactor, is about $20 a litre. And at scale, we predict that can be about a dollar Australian per litre, which will allow us to produce mincemeat at under $5 per kilo. And currently, lamb mince is being sold at around $20, $25 a kilo in supermarkets.
8 o'clock and I'm mindful of people's time, but I'm just going to ask this one question that I think ties quite nicely together, because WePlanet Australia's other main area that we campaign on besides food is energy, because we want to see an abundance of clean electricity. So the question is the energy intensity of cultivated meat an issue that should concern us?
It's fairly simple in that the biggest power draw for the process is the cleaning of the bioreactors between runs, and that's just done by using steam generation. So what you need is a sustainable energy source, a solar array, or something that is capable, and big batteries are capable of storing power that doesn't have to be used all of the time. So solid batteries, etc., that allow you to store large amounts of power that can be used for steam generation to clean your bioreactors between runs, or any other form of sustainable energy, as long as we don't use coal or gas-powered electricity primarily for the production of cultivated meat. I think it's going to be way more sustainable.
And we can, while it is a challenge, we can produce more clean electricity, and we've only got a limited amount of land on our planet. And I suppose that's why I and many other people are looking forward to seeing cultured meat succeed in the coming decades. And I'm really glad that I'm alive at this time to see the next revolution in food. Did you have any other final comments, Andrew?
No, if you want more information, I've got the websites and the on the line. If you have a question, please feel free to send me an email to if it didn't get covered tonight. And and especially if you're interested in getting on the waiting list to get dog treats with cultivated pork included, the waiting list is at the Rogue Pet website.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much for your presentation and for answering all of our many questions, Andrew. And we'll be looking out for the fortunes of Magic Valley. Thank you again.
Well, thank you very much. Good night, everyone.